So hi Izzy, hi Ellie. So I'm out in the boonies here and Papu's riding his motorcycle. But I wanted to go over your book, and you had to do a report on it on the Scarlet Letter. And so what I'm going to do, I already went over Nathaniel Hawthorne's life. So what I'm going to do is to go over the questions. And as I go over the questions that are on the back of your book, you'll be able to go over each chapter and know the story of the Scarlet Letter. So, and there's different ways to take the Scarlet Letter. You'll see. In my heart, I see that it was a book about a Puritan legalism, of shame and guilt and the guilt of sin. But it has a little grain, I should say, a thread going through it that talks about grace and forgiveness. Although Nathaniel Hawthorne doesn't present it, that's what I see, especially in the life of Hester. So let's begin. So go to your back of your book, and you'll look on the questions first on the custom house. We kind of went over the custom house. That's where Nathaniel Hawthorne had a job, and the job he looked on was pretty menial to him. Consider he was a writer, and all he was doing was stamping papers, surveyor of revenue, of money, as basically the ships would come in and have to pay their tariffs, and they had to make sure they pay their taxes. So in a way, he was part of a tax collecting system. And so he was pretty bored most of the time, and he was pretty discouraged with his life, although he so needed the money. So that's going back to what he was doing. And when he found this so-called treasure in the custom house, he basically had the idea and the theme of the Scarlet Letter. So your questions, first of all, ask what kind of business he had. And we know that he was a surveyor of revenue. And it says, well, what is a surveyor of revenue? That he would have to stamp the money documents and all of these things in the midst. And he was actually assigned by the political realm at that time, which at that time was basically Northern Democrat. So he was kind of not politically seen. Even his book wasn't taken because he was basically taking as the political stance of which they would do in the South, in living in the North. But he was in Salem, Massachusetts, and that's where he was born. That's where he grew up most of his life, and that's where he kept coming back to Salem. We know one thing about him is that he changed his name. It was Haythorne, and then he changed it to Hawthorne. Why did he do that? Because he was kind of embarrassed about his past, considering his father had been a judge during the Salem witch trials. And it was at that time, it was before the United States was there, it was in the 1600s, and he looked on that as a terrible background of heredity, seeing what happened there. So I'm not going to get into those details, but that was part of Nathaniel Hawthorne's life, and you can see his attitude towards the Puritan culture throughout the book because of this. So anyway, what did he find the treasure? Well, he basically was poking at the rubbish. He went up to the second story of the custom house where they kept an archives of old documents. And then he started poking through the dust and looking at each one of those documents and wondering what it was. Of course, the documents mostly were done by lawyers and such, but he found some historical evidence of actually a past surveyor of the revenue. And looking through his documents, he found the recorded account of Jonathan Pugh, the surveyor. So he looked to see, well, what was the surveyor like? He looked in his history, and he saw in his history that Jonathan Pugh was actually buried there. And so he was imagining Jonathan Pugh coming to him like this ghostly figure, because he knew at that time they had dug him up and they had found that his wig was still there and all this. And so it was kind of spooky, In Nathaniel Hawthorne's story, there's always these kind of spooky ghost type figures and stuff. His book is a romantic romantic type tragedy, or a dark romantic, So, but anyway, so he's seeing, like, what about Jonathan Pruitt? So as he's digging around, he finds basically some documents, and in the documents, he finds this mysterious red cloth. And opening the red cloth, he finds a mysterious letter, the letter A. It's about 3.5 inches on one side, I think it says, 4. So it's quite a big letter. And he's wondering, what was this letter about? So he goes on and reads the surveyor's account, as he was the surveyor's, or a lady's lawyer. The surveyor was the lawyer of this lady named Hester Prynne, and she lived way back in time, in the time when the surveyor lived. And basically, what did he need the lawyer for? And we'll find at the end of the book, we'll find out what happens, why she needed this lawyer. So, and we'll go on to that, and what happened with the money that basically Hester Prynne came in contact with. And so this is, we're looking at the beginning of the book, and then we'll look clear at the end of the book. So after the loss of his job, Hawthorne was always in need of money. He lost his job. Why? Because the politics had changed. So he was fired from his job, as he was a Northern Democrat, and the new president would be under General Zachary Taylor, who was a Whig and very much of an abolitionist. And so he felt like he got decapitated because he lost his job. But in the midst of this, he said, well, this is too autobiographical, meaning he was telling his life story. So he presents this new part, which is fiction. Really, it's a book of fiction, but it's based on a true happening. And so he looks into this old inspector's life, and as he's going through and debating how he's going to write it, he keeps seeing these dreams of this ghost of this inspector saying, you must write about the life of Hester Prynne and the Scarlet Letter. Pretty intriguing, huh? So let's find out more about this Scarlet Letter. So we get into the book in chapter 1. In chapter 1, you'll see there's a door, and this door is described in detail, as Hawthorne always does. And outside the door is a lone rose bush with a beautiful lone rose sitting there. And in the midst of this door, you look and you find out this door was a very important door, because it was the door of the prison or the jail. So this door would lead us into the world, really, as we go into the world of Hester Prynne. What was she doing in jail, for goodness sakes? Yes, she was there, a rose in the midst of jail. The rose giving her that fragrance that something good was going to be coming from this. As you see, he has a lot of symbols. The door is a symbol, the door of coming into the door of bondage, that she was put in prison, a prison in her life. Not even being just in jail, her whole life would be a prison, right? But in the midst of all this, there would be a glimmer of hope of this rose. The symbol of a rose, basically, there's a question that asks what the symbol is. And basically, this rose was the tenderness of a relief, that despite all this, there would be relief. So we look and say, oh no, is this there's dark about jails and prison and a woman going to jail? But no, there'd be another episode of what would happen in the future, kind of looking into the future. Also, some other symbols, of course, that are the church, and right behind the church, the graveyard, And so you have the graveyard, past graves, what's coming about, and this whole thing, and the church being, at that time, the Puritan church became very legalistic. When we think of the Pilgrims, they knew the Lord, and they were following what God would have them to do and the freedom there was. But when we get to the Puritans had a pretty much would get into this legalistic society, and basically as a utopia, considering a utopia that this would be God's society, became judges of each other and very legalistic in that point, not really bringing in the grace and the mercy of Jesus Christ as they should have, right? And that's kind of happens with when a church is backslide. They either backslide and become very liberal and compromised in their actions, or they backslide and go back to legalism and rules and regulations and depending on working your way to get to God, getting rid of your sins by a process of penance, getting rid of your sins in some way on your own, and not really taking in account of what Jesus did on the cross to take our sins, right? So very important. The point of view of the book, of course, is from Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's going to be the author's view of it, right? So you'll see some discrepancy. This is not just the view of the Puritans naturally. It is actually his view, as he is a Puritan, writing about a Puritan culture and using Puritan characters. This is his life. You can see he was disgruntled by his Puritan life in many ways. So also the tone. What is the tone? Well, it looks like it's pretty solemn at first when you start off with a door to go through and you're going into a prison door, right? And it's going to be a narrative. It's very important because the Scarlet Letter is American. This is a Puritan American writing this book, about the beginnings of America, really, in some ways. And so we have this book. Nathaniel Hawthorne was the first really not only narrative novel type book that America had, the first great writer, in fact, along with a few others, but his considered the first novel, and he's very descriptive in his story because it was basically a long, they used to just do short stories, and his was going to be a long story, which ended up to be a book, or this first American novel. Going on to chapter 2 now. So the Scarlet Letter, we're going to talk about what the Scarlet Letter is. So first of all, what's happening there? So a woman comes out of the jail, the town beadle, who is that? Well, that's the law guy, brings her out, and here's this woman holding a baby, and the baby, is squinting, kind of crying, a little bit squinting and looking around at the crowd, and the woman looks forlorn, but very, very beautiful. So the women of the town look at, they're all standing there, all of these so-called, they call them gossips, right? And they're basically saying, oh, this is terrible. They should have just put her to death. Oh, they should have took, not only, they put that A, she got to with her needlework, make this A to put on her, to label her, but they should have labeled with her A with a hot iron right on her forehead. They were being really judgmental, weren't they? And going on, they talked of her as being this hussy, and being, now that she'd have to, one of them says, well, now it's good that she'll have to wear this and be labeled, that we all, every day of her life, everybody could look down on her sin, And so, but Hester's appearance was not so. As she came out, she was very beautiful, very graceful, very noble, she was tall, beautiful dark hair and dark eyes, and rich complexion, dignified and very ladylike. And she held her baby close to her. Oh, excuse me. So we have Hester, and it talks about what were Hester's traits. And we see that basically Hawthorne describes her as very motherly to the baby, very, very looking like a mother would look, only a beautiful mother, so looking, and also her traits being very noble. Nothing in her looked like it would be that she would be an evil person at all. Then Hester's thoughts. He gets into some of her thoughts. And her hearts, she felt like, she felt like their heart had been flung in the street to be trampled on by everyone. and that everyone was looking not at her but right at her bosom, where this A, which she was had to make herself and put on herself and wear it constantly. And this A is beautiful and golden and beautiful and scarlet as it was. It was red and scarlet and gold and beautiful and would shine, that everyone would look at that and see and say, oh. In fact, some of the gossip said, why did she get to have such a beautiful letter on there? Why don't they just put a black letter on there? But she made her own letter to put on her. And so then, Hester's thoughts were like, this is going to be really intolerable, and this is horrible, and to go through this, but I shall go through it. So, of course, she was very sad, and especially being in jail, because her having to be in jail was a dark time in her life, of course. So on to, it says, how does the author enlist sympathy for her? Well, the picture that he gives is that she almost looks like Mother Mary holding the baby Jesus. That's a lot of sympathy when you think that they were looking at her as the Scarlet Letter, as she had committed adultery, A meaning adultery, that she would not reveal the father. So in the midst of that, he looks on her, especially Hawthorne looks on her like that she is worthy of divinity, that she basically is a woman, and a woman of not ill repute. So we'll find out more about that. But she thought some of the things you can imagine wearing the Scarlet Letter. She thought, am I going to go mad? Am I going to go crazy? And her thoughts went back to sometimes those reminiscing of her school days when she was a young girl, back in Europe, where she had come from, and her maiden years, and how she saw her father's face and his love, and her mother's love and anxious love for her, and she would run about as a little girl, and she looks back and says, wow, and here I'm ending up in this place now. Well, how did she end up in this place? We're going to find out. So then she went on and reminisced about an old man, that's stricken in years, that was paled and half humpbacked, a scholar though, and she looked, how in the world did she come to have to marry him? Well, we find out the poverty that her family had gone through, and basically giving their daughter to marriage to this older man would put her in a state where she would be taken care of. So we find that she never really had relations, with this older man. And we find, where is this man? Well, as we go through, we'll find out that it was thought, as she came to America first, and after 2 years, that his ship had crashed and that he was at the bottom of the ocean. But they didn't find his body, so they believed that she would be still married to this man. So that's the situation. And later on, we'll find out what happened to him, and he'll be coming back. But at that time, she thought she'd be free and be able to marry, and having this relationship and having this baby. It just turned into a great nightmare for her. So, and how about this baby? The baby, as the baby looked at this little baby girl looking at her chest right there, the baby's nursing or whatever, would see this beautiful letter A, and it would become something that she would grow to love. So let's go on to chapter 3. The recognition. What is the recognition? She's going to recognize somebody, right? So let's find out who she recognizes. So what would the penalty be? What would the penalty be? So here comes in Governor Bellingham, all the magistrates, they come in the whole town, and she's paraded through the town, and she's brought to the scaffold. The scaffold is basically up on top, so everybody can see her, up on these wooden steps up here where the scaffold was, where they actually would put people's head in the scaffold and have them, whipped, a whipping post like, or whatever, the scaffold clear up there. Well, they brought her up there, not whipping her, of course, but as they bringing her up there, they said that she should have had the death penalty, where people are put to death for her sins because of committing adultery. And so instead, she was given leniency, they said, to wear this scarlet letter and parade her through town, that everyone would see it, and that she would have to wear the scarlet letter for the rest of her life and spend 3 months in jail for her sin. And so this platform would be where she would have to, going up on the platform, everyone looking at her. And as she looked around, she would see their faces, and all of their faces grimacing at her and making fun of her and such, and basically labeling her. Now everyone knew that she was going to be an outcast or shunned. So it talks about Reverend John Wilson here, who's was the eldest reverend, and he basically comes, and he's an older man, and he says, well, he wanted to be able to talk about her, and that if she would actually show forth who was the father of the child, then she would, her time and sentence, and she wouldn't have to wear the scarlet letter possibly. So he brings in another man, this young, vibrant pastor. His name was Dimsdale. When you think of Dimsdale, that name, you think of he's pretty. Dimsdale, maybe he might be dim in some things, right? But they didn't think that then. This young, vibrant man, but he had already, gone to these English universities in Oxford. He was very elegant. He had a religious fervor for everyone around. To the Native Americans, he was very striking appearance, and they all loved him. They looked up to him, basically as an idol of their pastor, their great young pastor, right? So, how does Hester respond as he gets up and pleads? Or what is he pleading? Let's find out. So with his voice sweet and rich, he comes in down and it delivers this speech, and you can see how it describes him. His lips are trembling, when he talks, and first he bends down in silent prayer, and his charge to Hester is, you must speak out now. You must tell the name of your fellow sinner. You must speak out, or you are going to become a hypocrite. You're going to add hypocrisy to your sin. You need to speak out, his name. Was Hester's reaction? Of course, she would not. She would not tell the name. In fact, she kept shaking her head, saying, never, never, never. And so they'd say, well, speak it out. That's what you need to do, And so he said, it is too deep. She said, it is too deep branded. I cannot take off this letter anyway. She's saying, I'll keep this letter for the rest of my life. If that's a sentence for me, then that's a sentence for me. I'll keep it, but I will not speak. I will not speak out who the Father. She says, my child will seek a heavenly Father and not an earthly father. So here she tells him that she is covering for him, that she will not speak out. And now she's not afraid to take this letter for the rest of her life. Kind of noble in a sense, I would think. Quite noble. She wanted to protect, because if he had been revealed, he might have been put to death, and he'd have to experience probably more than she was even experiencing. You can see her love for him, to cover his sins for him. And how does Pastor Dimsdale, how does he respond? He said, oh, she has wondrous strength and generosity of this great woman's heart. Can you see what's happening there? Well, in the midst of all of this, she looks in and she sees another figure, and she's startled by this other figure. And the figure looks pretty dilapidated, but she recognizes him as possibly that figure being her husband. Remember, after 2 years, she was told that he was at the bottom of the ocean, and now she looks and she sees in the midst as some Indians bringing in, some Native Americans bringing in this man, and him looking there. You could imagine her eyes were like startled, startled, like, oh, who is this? And so he's actually changed his name coming back. Of course, his name would be Prin, or Prine, as her name was. But he had changed his name to Roger Chillingworth. So as Roger Chillingworth. So I'm going to stop right there for a sec.